Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shows, desolators, peasants, vassals. I am a useful idiot. Today I want to talk about Pakistan. Pakistan is a very, very important country and is a axis by which a lot of events and geopolitical events in the world today occur. And I think it's worthwhile for anybody that wants to keep an eye on what the developments in the world are. It's really important to watch every single event that happens in Pakistan. And that should become clear as I go through all the material I have today. So the recent stories that I want to bring up that bring Pakistan to the fore again are the fact that Tahir al-Qadri, a former politician under the military government, has recently returned from Canada to Pakistan, and he says he wants a, quote, revolution, unquote, against the civilian government. He has emerged from nowhere, yet organized a march which arrived in Islamabad on January 14th. No mean feat, since marches are usually banned in the city, and it was broadcast non-stop on television. So this gives us a signal that there's perhaps a new leader ascending in Pakistan, and that it's time for the military to take control of the government again. And there's a lot of reasons why that would be. The fact that they took on a $40 billion IMF loan several years back, and in spite of all the money that they get from the United States, they are in dire economic consequences and are saddled with international debt, like so many others. And another sign that things could be changing in Pakistan is the fact that the day after that, on January 15th, the Supreme Court suddenly ordered the arrest of the Prime Minister, Raja Pervez Ashraf, over a long-running bribery scandal. It says the court, along with the army, has long been hostile to the government. And this would be the time to get rid of the civilian government because they have an election this year, and it'll be hard to make some changes after the election. And interestingly enough, it turns out that a recent Pew survey showed that Pakistanis are the least enthusiastic about democracy in the Middle East. And that would be because they've had a military government practically since the inception of the country, and their whole existence is colored by their adversarial relationship with India, and that continues to this day. And then the other big development is that recently Pakistan axed the Baluchistan chief minister, and the national government is taking control of that southwestern province and has alerted the army for deployment to the capital of Baluchistan. And that's a big development because Baluchistan has a lot to do with what's happening in Pakistan. Not only will I discuss Baluchistan here, but I'm going to do a separate video because that's how important it is. So what about Pakistan? Well, what I want to cover is the fact that they have a number of notable things worth talking about right now. One is they're involved in multiple wars. Another is that they have multiple layers of government. And another is that they have very interesting and complex geopolitical connections with China and India. So that makes it important for the world and the United States. They have a large and growing nuclear arsenal, which makes them a very dangerous place. And that's one of my main points here. While the American foreign policy seems to be focused on Iran, the fact is that American foreign policy needs to be focused on Pakistan because they potentially pose the biggest threat, geopolitical, that we've ever seen. And that is because they have a large, radicalized underclass of Muslims and a country that is teetering right as we speak, and a country that has been loaded to the teeth with nuclear weapons. And then we have Pakistan as yet another artificial state with built-in ethnic rivalries that will continue to badger them as they do countries all over the world. And then, of course, last but not least, the extremely complex relationship that Pakistan has with the U.S., and as we now know, playing both sides of the fence. And then, of course, like I always like to do, put it in the context of history. And Pakistani history is actually very short and modern. because of course they got their independence from India right after India gained independence from the British in the post-World War II era. So let's do a quick look over Pakistani history, and I'm going to put this in a nutshell. So it's just the highlights, so we get the picture that Pakistan is much like countries we've seen all over North Africa and the Middle East, where they have attained independence fairly recently from a colonial vacuum, and their history seemed to be riddled with military coups and violence that continues in cycles, particularly with this ethnic and sectarian violence. We see that all over the globe, and that's what's eating up American foreign policy now. So Pakistan, interestingly enough, was first conceived in 1906. The Muslim League was founded, and it was all about an Indian Muslim separatist movement. They wanted their own Muslim country because India is predominantly Hindu. So I found that rather interesting because it closely ties in with the fact that we had Jews in Europe around that same time thinking about their homeland in Palestine. So interesting period of history. So in 1947, the partition was done. India got its independence from Britain, and then Pakistan got its independence from India. And the following year, 1948, not only did the founding leader die right away, but they had their first war with India over Kashmir, one of many wars that they've had over the years over Kashmir. Kashmir continues to be a disputed territory claimed by both. And then in 1951, the man who succeeded the founding leader who died the previous 2 years before that, he was assassinated. And then through the 50s and 60s, we had a military dictatorship. By 1965, we had the second war with India over Kashmir. And then in 1971, East Pakistan wanted to secede. And of course, India stepped in to help, and there was a Pakistani civil war. And East Pakistan seceded in 1971 and created the country of Bangladesh. Then through the 70s and 80s, there was, of course, a lot of turmoil in Pakistan, and they were a conduit for the U.S. in our efforts to arm the Mujahideen in fighting the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. So we were good friends with Pakistan militarily and under the surface, while all the histrionic rhetoric was still continuing. So there wasn't a lot of people that knew exactly that Pakistan and the U.S. were friends, but so the U.S., the CIA, and Pakistan were all involved in training the Taliban and AlQaeda to fight the Soviets. So, and then a major character in Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, was in and out of the government through 1988 through 1993. And, of course, Benazir Bhutto would show up again in 2007 when it was immediately assassinated. So this is the sort of thing that colors Pakistani politics. So then in 1999, we had the third Kashmir war with India. And that's when General Pervez Musharraf had his coup. And, of course, Musharraf was in power when 9/11 happened. And then that's when the U.S. befriended Pakistan again, and they joined in on the so-called War on Terror. So that more or less brings us up to now. In 2008, the Musharraf finally resigned, and the present Prime Minister took place, and then that was the same year that they got this huge IMF loan. And so that's a general rundown of history, and now how Pakistan plays into our foreign policy picture in the United States, and this is why it's important to Americans. And why it's important to me is because according to a 2005 report by the National Intelligence Council and the CIA, Pakistan is slated to be a, quote, failed state, unquote, by 2015. Quote, as it would be affected by civil war, complete Talibanization, and struggle for control of its nuclear weapons, unquote. Then he go on to say that the country, Pakistan, would suffer a, quote, Yugoslav-like fate, unquote, and that, quote, Pakistan will never recover easily from decades of political and economic mismanagement, divisive policies, lawlessness, corruption, and ethnic friction, unquote. Couldn't put it better myself, and that's why Iran is not the biggest threat to the United States or the world. Pakistan is. This is potentially the most dangerous situation on earth, and those few paragraphs I just read spell it out. We have the potential for a civil war, complete Talibanization, and radicalizing of the population, and then the struggle for nuclear weapons. So you think Iran is a problem. Iran is a relatively stable state with a very strong government and military. Their nuclear program is very closely guarded. They have no intentions of putting those kind of weapons into terrorist arms, certainly not at this juncture. And they don't even have a nuclear bomb yet. But we're looking at a country that's full of a poor underclass, a lot of separatist ethnic rivalries, and all sorts of other shenanigans going on. It's loaded to the teeth with nuclear weapons. In fact, Pakistan builds more nuclear weapons than any other country on earth. And this is ironic because the United States foreign policy is, of course, playing with the loaded deck because U.S. policies that we see all over North Africa and all over the Middle East is to weaken the central government and fracture very loose federal structures and exploit ethnic rivalries and cause internal divisions. We saw that tactic used all over North Africa, all over the Middle East, and that is the tactic that is going to be used in Pakistan. There is a map that is available, and I will include it in the link below, that shows the reconfigured region after U.S. foreign policy is concluded. It includes a broken up Pakistan and other configurations all over the Middle East, including a free Kurdistan and a free Baluchistan. But I'll get into that later. So we have the fact that Pakistan is fighting multiple wars, and that's one of the things I brought up earlier, because they're not only fighting supposedly AlQaeda elements in Pakistan, which they are now, because AlQaeda has turned its guns on Pakistan, is destabilizing Pakistan with terrorist attacks. And of course there's other international agents working in Pakistan perpetrating terrorist attacks as well. And as we know, the CIA is there. It was a year or so ago, and the CIA agent was arrested, and he shot 2 ISA agents, the Pakistani Secret Service, military intelligence. And so it's no secret what's going on there. In fact, it's actually a lot more complicated than that, because what we have in Pakistan is the fact that we have U.S. Special Forces, Black Ops, inside Pakistan. We have military contractor mercenaries, the former Blackwater company, Z. We have Dynacore in there. We have the CIA, and of course Mossad is in there, and everybody else. So when things happen, it's hard to know who to pin it on. And so the Pakistanis are at war with Al-Qaeda elements. Then they are also at war with the separatists in Baluchistan, who want to have independence. And in fact, Baluchistan was annexed by Pakistan when they gained their independence back in 1947. And there's been a struggle ever since. And it's much like the struggle we see with the Kurds and the Tuaregs, and so it goes throughout the post-colonial world. And that reminds me, we have 4 ethnic groups in Pakistan. We have the Pashtuns, we have the Baluchi, we have the Singhi, we have the Punjabis, and they all are consider themselves part of those tribes and not necessarily Pakistani. A lot of modern Pakistanis, of course, consider that country of Pakistan, but when you get to all the remote outlying tribal areas that are all around Pakistan, you'll find that allegiances are more to the tribes, and that's certainly true of Baluchistan. So anyway, so then the other war that Pakistan has is in the northern region, tribal region, with Waziristan, and that is the Taliban headquarters. And as long as the Taliban behave themselves, the Pakistanis are happy to equip and train them and send them back into Afghanistan to fight American troops. And that brings us to the third war the Pakistanis involved in. And they're actually involved in 4 wars if you consider their confrontation with India and Kashmir. And so the third war is with the U.S. And let's not kid ourselves. The United States is at war with Pakistan. We have 200 drone attacks just this last year or so. And we have over 3,000 deaths, including 2,000 civilians and 200 children. And that constitutes a war. We have artillery and mortar fire being exchanged across the border in Afghanistan and Pakistan. That constitutes a war. We have Pakistani troops looking on as these events occur and not siding with either the United States or Taliban, although they are giving Taliban sanctuary. And all reports show that the Pakistani intelligence are training and equipping the Taliban more and more and sending them into Afghanistan to kill Americans and kill NATO troops. And we've noticed that the pace of that has picked up in Afghanistan. And that won't end because the Taliban and the Afghans will fight to the last man until the occupation is ended. And we need to realize that. And it's not about terrorism because the Taliban are interested in getting rid of the occupiers. They do not have a global agenda. That is AlQaeda. So, but interestingly, we have the Pakistani intelligence and military hiding Osama bin Laden, hiding the Taliban. They're more than happy to hand over Al-Qaeda operatives, but they protect the Taliban. In fact, Pakistani intelligence and military are involved in training terrorists that operate in that entire region and probably in all the areas where they're fighting Western troops and American troops and British troops and French troops. Because witnesses have said there's Tajiks and Kazakhs and Libyans and everyone else that's training and getting armed in Pakistan. And so no matter what the public posturing is, the true fact is that they have multiple layers of government. That's not unlike the U.S., where the CIA operates with a certain amount of impunity, and the Pentagon is a sub-government of its own. We find the same thing in Pakistan, where they have layers of government because the intelligence is known to act on their own. The military's been in charge for so long, they just need figureheads. They don't really need anybody to run the place for them. And then the big picture is that we have another artificial state, and it has somewhat akin to colonial borders in the fact that we have a bunch of different ethnic groups that are crammed together in an artificial country. And just like everywhere else, of course, the Pakistani government can characterize freedom fighters in Baluchistan as terrorists and can justify that. And but it's also an ignored region, Baluchistan, and has an underclass, and that's much like the Tuaregs in northern Mali as well. An ethnic group who has missed the boat as far as development in their own country. And of course, Pakistan has vast untapped resources, particularly in Baluchistan, so that will be a big factor in American foreign policy. And another reason why we know that Pakistan is in the sights of the United States as far as foreign policy is because they have a major place in the Project for a New American Century, the 1980s, 1990s document that was written up with Dick Cheney, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, and that whole crowd of neocons who had a American global hegemony, and they outlined the fact that there would be proxy war and destabilization, and that Pakistan would play both sides, and that we would play both sides, and that eventually the idea is to destabilize Pakistan and break it up into more manageable parts. And of course, the United States also has a contingency plan to take control of nuclear weapons in Pakistan. I was relieved to hear that. So I can imagine a scenario where if the country lapsed into chaos, there is an American plan to secure their nuclear weapons, and that's a very important thing. But we're going to see this fragmentation. I did a video on fragmentation. Not too many people watched it, but it's going to be a very important part of the geopolitical scene as countries break down into smaller units. We're going to see this globally for all sorts of different reasons. So eventually the borders of Iraq, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan will all be redrawn. And it's a repeat of a colonial tactic. The same blueprint we see in North Africa and the Middle East, and that's to destabilize, exploit these ethnic rivalries, set up puppet governments, take control of the resources. And we'll see that in Pakistan too. And so anyway, there's a quick look. Let's see if I missed anything. No, the only thing I would add to that is the fact that yes, we have a very complex relationship with Pakistan. On the surface, they're an ally, and there's certain ways we are allied. But the other underpinning, and that's one of the things that makes it so complex, is that we're also at war with Pakistan. Make no mistake. Drone strikes, special forces, mercenaries, all operating inside Pakistan, mortar, air fights, artillery exchanges on the border, and Pakistan arming and training the Taliban and sending them into Afghanistan. So there's the big picture. So I hope everyone now realizes that Pakistan is the country to watch. And like I said earlier, we have them considered to be a failed state by 2015. That's only in the next 2 years. So let's keep our eye on what happens in Pakistan. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.